All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Institute. My name is Patrick Fogarty. I'm chairperson of REI, and I am a senior director at Alvarez & Marsal, Inc. REI has been around since 1974. Our mantra is about developing professionals, building careers, and we're affiliated with the College of Business at Stony Brook University. REI serves as a spokesperson on contemporary issues and as a resource for professional career development. We do that through symposia, such as today's Zoom symposium. We prepare white papers. We provide luncheons, workshops, coursework with the students at the university and through social media. We also provide hands-on training through internships, networking opportunities, and provide scholarship to the students at Stony Brook. Today, we have an exciting panel, including Kevin Law from the Long Island Association, Peter Elkowitz from the Long Island Housing Partnership, Christopher Jones from the Regional Planning Association. Our Zoom symposia is a focus on Long Island real estate in 2020. I first want to thank our sponsors, and the sponsors for this Zoom program today include Engel Berman, Meyer Swazi, Ruskin Moscow Faltacek, Roman Stein Associates. Our normal operations are handled through sponsorships and assessments with our 46 directors. And I would like to recognize our sponsors at this time. Our diamond sponsors include SIBS, Friedman LLP, New York Community Bank, Ridgewood Savings Bank. Our platinum sponsors include Alvarez & Marsal, Burton LLP, Combined Resources Consulting and Design, Cullen & Dykman, Farrell Fritz, the Gito Group, Jaspin Schlesinger, Sterling National Bank, and VHB. Our gold sponsors include ACC Real Estate Services, Advantage Title, Bank of America, C.A. Rich & Associates, Castagna Realty, Sir Tillman Ballin Adler and Hyman, Cronin & Cronin Law, Daniel Gale Sotheby's, Damianos Realty, Esquire Bank, Grutius & Company, Jovia Federal Credit Union, Laurel Environmental, Lewis Lefkowitz Realty, Maspeth Federal Savings, Mazars USA, Murphy & Lynch PC, NAI Long Island, Rampart Insurance, RD Geronimo and Associates, Schroeder and Strom LLP, Signature Bank, Tritech Real Estate, and Valley National Bank. Our silver sponsors include Brown and Altman LLP, Coach Realtors, and Merit Engineering. Today's Zoom is going to be moderated by Dave Panetta. Dave is the Executive Managing Director of the Long Island office of Cushman & Wakefield. Dave's responsible for the leadership of his team, the implementation of key business initiatives, client relationship management, business development, and recruitment. Dave's work emphasizes corporate real estate representation, government affairs, economic development, and tax incentive procurement. He has extensive experience in investment property sales, property management, landlord and tenant representation, and real estate development. Last but not least, I want to thank our Executive Director, Maggie Palermo, and our Secretary and Symposium Chair, Ed Guttleber, for helping to pull this together. And with that, I'd like to hand the program over to Dave Panetta. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Pat, thank you so much. I enjoy doing these. You know, as much as we all know about what's going on with the real estate market, I always leave these symposium, even being a moderator, with information that I didn't know before. So I'm excited to get started here as well. I would like to take a moment to just remember our friend Jack O'Connor. He was a board member here for a couple of decades. And, you know, Jack was a personal mentor of mine, which is unusual in that we've never worked for the same company and I'm a competitor of his. So he was always very generous with his time, with his expertise. And I know a lot of people share that same feeling. So farewell to Jack. I also would like to take this time to thank my co-chair Marvin Rosen from Rampart Insurance. While I get to be up here and have my face seen in front of hundreds of people, he's done just as much work, and he's very quiet and happy, helping put these programs together, which do take quite some time to put together. So with that, I would like to introduce, and I'm not going to be as long and as gracious as Pat is with the intros, but Kevin Law, President and CEO of Long Island Association, which everybody knows. Kevin's been in that capacity for the past decade. He's, I think, on the board of the MTA, the Regional Economic Development Council, and previously the President and CEO of LIPA. We also have Peter Elkowitz, is the President and CEO of the Long Island Housing Partnership, and he's been on that for 3 decades. So I think you, it only started the year before you, so I guess you were part of that whole rollout of the Long Island Partnership, Peter. And their goal is to provide affordable housing to those that are unable to secure decent and safe housing themselves. So we'll have a lot to talk about that today, especially in today's climate. And we now have Chris Jones. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Planner for the Regional Planning Association. He's been there since 1994. And he's got a very sort of super regional perspective, where the RPA is in New York, New Jersey, and in Connecticut. He's been published on regional planning and urban policy. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, we will start our symposium. So one thing that I've noticed, you know, I've been in this business for 30 years. And for the first 20 years, every time you heard a symposium, people speak, they always keep talking about the problems of Long Island and how nothing's really changed. But in the past 10 years, there's been some significant changes, and brought largely by the 3 people that we have here as panelists today. And, you know, Long Island structural assets. So I'm going to pose the question out there is, how are we better positioned now, you know, double track, triple track, and everything else? How are we better positioned now in Long Island than we were over the previous, you know, 2 decades? And anybody can answer that.
Hey, David, it's Kevin. If you could hear me, I'll take a shot.
Go ahead.
Well, first, I'd like to compliment you and Patrick and the whole Real Estate Institute at Stony Brook. You guys do a great job. I've done this before, happy to do it again. And I also want to share your comments about Jack. Jack was a dear friend, a great guy, an okay golfer, and but smart and funny. And that's how I tend to judge people. I like people who are smart and funny, and Jack was certainly smart and funny. And if you think about it, in the last year, Long Island has lost some real estate greats. Jack, John Guttleber, Frank Castagna, and Jerry Wolkoff. You know, that's 200 years more of real estate expertise that Long Island is now going to be without. So those guys were all kings of the real estate world out here, and and I had the pleasure of being friends with all of them, and I will miss all of them, including my friend Jack. Let me start off on a positive note. We just had an LIA board meeting yesterday, and our senior economist, John Rizzo, who is also a professor of economics at Stony Brook, he sort of made us feel good with all the doom and gloom out there. And while there's still some challenges ahead, he thought that because the Long Island economy was very strong going into the pandemic, we are going to do better than most regions coming out of the pandemic. If we were heading into a recession, or if the Long Island economy was, not doing well, that was going to make the recovery that much harder. And so, it sounds very logical and makes sense. And so you think about where we were in February. Real estate market was doing very well. We had the lowest unemployment region in the state of New York, almost in the country at 3%. And billions of dollars were being invested all over the island in various projects, from Belmont to Ronkonkoma Hub and to Brookhaven National Lab and out to Calverton. So those were all good signs. And, that bodes well for a good recovery. And right now, as you know, I also co-chair the Regional Economic Development Council. We've been charged with coming up with a post-COVID recovery plan and things that we could be doing as a region to help us come out of the pandemic and recover. That plan is due Friday of next week. We have to send it to Albany. And if you or any of your members have any suggestions as to what you'd like to see in there, make sure, reach out to me and we'll try to incorporate it into the plan. So I'll stop there and hand it over to my dear friends, Peter Elkowitz and Chris Jones, who's also a great guy.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Kevin. I'm just going to make a few comments, and I couldn't agree more and echo what Kevin just said. As we all know, the real estate is a critical factor in Long Island's economic recovery. And I want to say that the housing market continues to bounce back after the COVID on Long Island. Reasons include people wanting to move from the urban areas, people looking for more space to live in, safety concerns with health have all driven up our housing market out in the suburbs. The millennials right now are taking advantage of low interest mortgages that still remain low. As Kevin said, the economy was strong when we went into this. The economy is strong, I think, mostly because we got COVID under control due to the governor keeping everyone informed, including Kevin with Newsday did excellent keeping everyone informed during this process. It was almost like when we reopened our offices at 50%, people were relaxed and wanted to come back and get involved again. Our senior population, the builders have confidence in our senior population. As you see a lot of senior developments going up, I think that's going to be on the next session next week. And the U.S. median home asking price has hit an all-time high, especially in the Northeast. And I think mainly because the COVID situation, most people feel are under control here without having even a vaccine in place as of yet, but under control because we're doing what we're supposed to be doing here. So we see home prices increasing here. I'll stop there. And Chris, I don't know if you want to add to some of the other.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And again, Dave and Pat and others, thanks for hosting this and inviting me, and Peter and Kevin. It's great to be talking with you guys again. I miss you guys. I don't make it out there personally as much as I used to, but I'm glad to be able to do it this way. So, and I certainly agree with with what you both said, that Long Island is positioned well for the recovery when it comes. And I think, Dave, to your question, with what's happened in the last 10 years, why is Long Island positioned better than maybe it was, a decade ago? And I think it's, for a number of reasons. I think, one point I want to make is that, we look at the region as a whole, and there certainly have been some moves from New York City to Long Island and other suburban areas, but over the long run, that's not a zero-sum game. Long Island does well when the city does well, and vice versa over the long run, just in terms of the amount of income that flows between the two places. It's a region that attracts global companies, and I think the long-term future is really pretty bright. I think in the immediate term, we've got some big challenges, fiscally, as much as anything else. But I think over the long run, this is, global companies are attracted by talent. This region has it more than any other place. We have assets from our public transit system to just the concentration of firms here that you can't replicate anywhere else, and all the reasons that both New York City and Long Island were doing well before, they're not going away. But I do think, two things I want to point out that why I think Long Island is maybe better positioned now than it was. Its biggest challenge in my mind, and it still is a challenge that we have to face, with just kind of the lack of multifamily and affordable housing on Long Island. And certainly in the last decade, you've seen a lot more transit-oriented development, a lot more multifamily development than you had before. It's still a challenge. It's still less on Long Island than in other parts of the region. It's still a place where inequality is growing. Even though it's become more diverse, it's still one of the most segregated places in the country. So those challenges haven't gone away, but I think there was progress being made. And the other is just Long Island has big infrastructure investments that are about to come online. East Side Access and the third track, and in particular, along with the double track. And I did a similar panel out on New Jersey earlier this week, and for them, their big challenge was, just how are we going to get, the big projects that we need, everything from, the Gateway Tunnel to the Port Authority bus terminal. Those things are important for Long Island too, but certainly not as much as the East Side Access project and the third track, which should be coming online within the next couple of years. And I think that, so you have a built-in boost, coming along, relatively soon. And I think one of the questions is how, Long Island can take advantage of it.
So Chris, if you could, a lot of people hear double track, triple track, East Side Access. Just real quick, how does that help Long Island? And like, what is it, and what what problem is it solving?
Sure. I mean, well, as I said, Long Island and New York City really benefit when they're both doing well and tied together. And it's all about, access and, and labor force. And when you think about it, whether a company is in Manhattan or, whether it's in Hicksville, the more people that they can draw, the more talented workforce they can draw from, the better they are, the more valuable the real estate is, et cetera, et cetera. So East Side Access will do a couple of things. One, it will shorten commuting times for people who are headed to the east side of Manhattan by as much as 40 minutes a day for some people. That has a ripple effect on housing prices. It kind of broadens the commuter shed. It makes Long Island a more attractive place to live. It gives people more more time. It generates that much more income that comes into Long Island. And the third track really kind of does the reverse. It allows companies on Long Island to draw from a much bigger labor pool. People in Queens and Manhattan and beyond that can then come in on the third track, besides which it just will make the Long Island Railroad that much more reliable, which really and that's kind of the key thing moving forward. We can talk about some of the changes that might happen in terms of working from home and things, but those pieces, it just makes the whole transportation system more reliable, and it allows companies to access much bigger labor pool.
And Dave, if I may, to add on to Chris's point, those investments, and we're talking about billions and billions of dollars that the state is investing in our region in terms of the Long Island Railroad and the East Side Access into Grand Central Station. Those really do a tremendous job of supporting real estate values out here. And, for all the real estate folks, that's what, they care about. And homeowners, that's what they care about. They want to know how quick their commute is. It helps them sell homes when they can say, oh, yeah, we're a 45-minute commute to Manhattan. So these investments really will strengthen real estate values out here as well.
So we've also seen like the MTA investing in the Hicksville train station. They put in $121 million into an update of their, the Ronkonkoma hub, right? We have Tritech forward. They've developed a lot of their residential component, and they're moving into office and the retail. And then all the TOD stuff that we've all spoken about. And we're sort of evolving into an district with Hauppauge Business Park, and then with the Melville Employment Center, which is sort of branching into that next level of, you know, stopping the brain drain, keeping people here. Peter, what I wanted to ask you is, you know, a lot of us are not focused in on the affordable housing, other than we know it's 10% or 20% of market rate development. But from what we were you and I were talking about previously, even this year, the development of this has been very robust. So could you just talk about that a bit?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Yeah, I would love to talk about it, because I think first we need to look at what we had to do as Long Islanders to get the development process moving forward. And just breaking it up into three areas. One, the approval process, two, the actual construction of the homes, and three, the sale during the pandemic. So on the processing of applications, the first thing that town boards, DBA boards had to do, planning boards had to do, was to come up with a new procedure to hold public meetings and hearings. And in many municipalities, virtual meetings like Zoom were being used, which allowed the members of the public to participate in these hearings and ask questions. Last night, Tritech's development in Bayshore was approved. They were starting the hearing process right at the beginning of the pandemic. It was completed as of last night with an approval. I think it's something that we can learn from this pandemic. It's a very productive, organized approach to handle public meetings. People with disabilities were able to participate from home. The millennials that couldn't come out because they also have to babysit their children could participate from home. There's a lot of pros to having these virtual meetings, and maybe it's something that we continue after the pandemic, that we continue holding some of these meetings. But in order to do that, we needed all levels of government to proceed with development. They needed to approve this. I will say that some governments chose not to move in a virtual position, which slowed some development on Long Island. As far as the construction, you remember it was limited or totally restricted during COVID, unless it was an emergency construction to protect the health and safety, or affordable housing also fell under that. But all non-essential construction had to stop. So it became a question: if someone was granted a building permit, usually they have about 1 year to start the construction and complete it. Would they be able to take that permit and not go for a renewal, because renewals were also delayed in some municipalities? So that slowed the process a little bit, but it made the developer think a little bit more. I think one municipality like Brookhaven actually extended the building permits to 18 months at that point. So it's another thing that we might want to consider down the road. But I will say that there is a lot of development going on. The partnership was strong during this process. We took on 10 new developments, creating over 1,000 units, of which of those 1,000 units, 100 were affordable rental and home ownership. So it's moving along. We held 3 actual virtual lotteries. We had to change our procedure. We held one for Central Islip Development. We held one for the city of Glen Cove, and one in Deer Park. So our work has continued. It has made us rethink how we handle our work, and hopefully going forward, in some cases, it made it stronger how we handle things. So.
All right, good, thank you. So 2 other structural assets that Long Island has, and just adding on to it and make mention, is all the previous work done at JFK and the work that's proposed here and moving forward at LaGuardia. I mean, that tied into East Side Access, double track, triple track, and everything else. Long Island really has, over the past 10 or 15 years, has shifted gears and moved to where we need to be. So Kevin, you're involved very much at the state level, and is there anything that we've learned from other areas that we should be applying here? So part of this symposia is the next 10 years, and then we're going to talk a little bit about COVID. So what have we learned from some other regions? And Chris, you could talk a little bit about maybe Jersey and Connecticut. Have they done that now we know what best practices are? But Kevin, why don't you start with that on how do we transfer success and failures in other areas to here in Long Island moving forward?
Well, Dave, I think it starts with leadership. Whether you like, and not to be partisan in any way, and whether you like his policies, all his policies or not, you really got to give Governor Cuomo a lot of credit, because a lot of these big projects that you just listed would not be happening but for his involvement, his hands-on involvement. So for instance, LaGuardia Airport going through a $4 or $5 billion major renovation. That's going to be the first new airport built in the United States in 26 years. We haven't built a new airport. Other countries, Middle East, Europe, Asia, building airports, modern airports. Well, we haven't done one since Denver. And he got both LaGuardia and in a public-private partnership. And that's a lesson learned that New York State and Long Island wasn't very good at. And that's the 3 Ps, the triple Ps of public-private partnerships. And so he got the airline dollars, both with Delta at JFK. And so, and similarly, since the 1950s, and always, was fatally flawed due to the NIMBYs who didn't want to live through the construction. Nobody was ever against the merits of the program, but they just didn't want to live through the construction. And again, the guys within years, including the folks within the league. Let's build it within the existing right-of-way. Let's not have to condemn any other properties, especially residential properties, and force them to think out of the box. And again, did a public-private partnership, and which led to, and he was clever. Rather than call it a rail project, he called it a grade elimination project, and was eliminating 7 deadly grade crossings, including the one that killed 9 teenagers back in the 70s. That has been, again, talked about since then. And so thinking outside the box, inviting the private sector in to partner with government has been tremendous. And then the other lesson we learned, and again, I think helped get these projects done or, under construction. And most of them are ahead of schedule and under budget, which, is not our reputation in this region. But the other thing he did was, and other states had done it, and New York State never did it. And that was, he allowed for design build. The design build allows for one general contractor to be in charge. It used to be every public project had to have 3 or 4 GCs, and they all had their subs. And whenever anything went wrong, they all went like this and pointed to the other contractor. And since everybody was responsible, nobody was responsible. And by allowing for the design build and incentivizing developers that you could receive a bonus by getting the project done ahead of time, or you could be penalized for delays, it's working. And again, we never did that before. So that was a good lesson learned from other states, and I think will continue to be the norm going forward. And what he has to do, though, now he has to allow county and town governments to do the same for their public works projects.
Yeah, I guess like self-certification is something the city does that we don't do as well, which could speed things up.
That would be huge, and other states do that as well. Allowing an engineer to certify that the plan meets all building codes and planning codes and set and standards. And then upon that filing, the developer can begin construction. We should be able to do it. COVID world makes a lot of sense to submit a plan to a municipality saying it's in compliance, knowing that his license through the New York State Department of Education is on the line. Not going to happen. And if it does, the guy's going to be out of work. So that's something we should definitely do and pursue. I know the LIA with the ABLI and the Long Island Builders Institute and SIBS, we are all very supportive of that.
All right, good. Chris?
Yeah, I have, one, kind of example of something where I think Long Island can learn from other parts of the region. I think there's other things that people can learn from Long Island from, but, on the housing front and transit-oriented development in particular, New Jersey has actually done a better job than Long Island, or they've had more production there over the last 20, 30 years than on Long Island. And I think there's two reasons for it. One is that the investments that Long Island is going to get from East Side Access and the third track that we talked about, New Jersey had 15 years ago once they instituted Midtown Direct and other improvements that really slashed commuting time. And so you had, the value around these train stations, increasing. So that creates the value for it. The other thing is that they have, state requirements to build affordable housing. The Mount Laurel decision and what's come out of that, every municipality has a target that they have to meet. And I've talked to some developers who work both in New Jersey and Long Island and say, which place is it? They said, oh, New Jersey. And I said, what's the reason for it? It's like, because, the municipalities, have to provide it. So there's, and the state provided some assistance to doing that. So it's a very different conversation. So, so you end up having just having it's not easy by any means, but it still is, it's a much better starting point than it is in a lot of places in New York.
Well, what's interesting is I don't think human nature has changed. When I got married almost, I guess, 27 or 28 years ago, we rented part of a house, when we first got married, because there wasn't, a Heatherwood community or a Avalon community that had a pool, clubhouse, and amenities, other young people. So we were buried in the middle of a neighborhood. All of a sudden now we're building more and more of these more modern market rate apartments, but that was a need that could have satisfied something 30 years ago. Another thing is my parents, my dad's 88, my mom's 84, and they pretty much would have lived the rest of their lives in their single family home in Hauppauge. And they wound up buying a townhome, 55 and over, townhome community, and they absolutely love it. But that wasn't really available 20 years ago or, 30 years ago. So Long Island is just catching up. And I sort of think the next thing, like the Broadway Mall, if you guys are familiar with the Broadway Mall, it's walking distance to the Hicksville train station, which is a major train station. It's got big box stores that aren't doing well. That should really be turned into like a Meisner Park from Boca or a City Place from, Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, where there's the residential within the retail, within the office, within the medical, and you sort of have like a little, self-contained, city there. But those keep getting turned down all across Long Island still. But Long Island, I see MTA's made a couple of acquisitions in Bethpage and a few others. So all of this is I guess to support the double track, triple track?
Well, it's an overall big capital improvement plan in both the tracks and the stations. And then what they're examining now is their parking situation. And can some of that parking be replaced with structured parking, which would then allow for some TOD?
Right.
And so, in fact, just yesterday or the day before, the MTA put out RFP seeking transit-oriented development on a lot they own in Westbury. And so, you guys could, if Dave, I could forward that to you and you could circulate it to the Real Estate Institute members for some of your developers might be interested in that. So even the MTA is thinking differently now. MTA has a lot of different issues. As you mentioned before, I'm now on the board. I'm the Suffolk County representative. Um, and we got major, major problems. We have a $16 billion budget with a $12 billion problem. You know, we're not always going to be in this COVID pandemic, but right now, the MTA is hemorrhaging, and a lot of projects, fortunately, the capital projects are moving forward under a capital budget, and they'll continue. But operations are going to be significantly, or could be significantly impacted if we don't get some federal assistance for, you know, this transit system as well as other transit systems throughout the country. You know, commuters can't afford to pay anymore. The rates, the monthly fares are high, the subways are high. And you can't just do it all through the fare increases. So there's a potential for service cuts and other operational reduction. And you know, that could have a negative impact on, and partisan bickering will end eventually in Washington, and they'll come to the investments in the MTA strengthen the overall economy and will strengthen our region. And remember, we're a net generator of income to Washington. And so it's in their interest to make sure that the biggest economy outside of California, meaning the metropolitan area that Chris represents with New Jersey, Connecticut, you know, Long Island, and the city, we are the most important engine in the country, and investments in the rail will continue to make us be that engine.
Right. Okay, good. So let's migrate a little bit to COVID. We've been put into a forced economic shutdown versus, you know, a subprime real estate meltdown, or the tech bubble busting, some of the other triggers that normally, you know, precede a recession. So does the panel feel, and again, anybody can jump in on this, are we going to recover more quickly? Did you have any, Long Island meaning, are we going to recover more quickly? Have, you know, the businesses gone out? Will that become accretive to the businesses that stayed in, you know, by getting those customers? What's your ideas on that?
Again, Dave, Peter, go. Go ahead, Peter. Peter, go.
All right, I'll comment on that. I will say that from a housing experience, sometimes we were always the shadow of New York City, but now New York City kind of is a little bit closed down with what's going on. You could see that even with the schools that are happening, that people who had maybe a summer house now have kept out, stayed in their house out on Long Island. And you see that in the school enrollments out, especially on the East End in Bridgehampton and Amagansett and some of those other areas out there where the school enrollment doubled because people are not moving back to the urban areas. With that said, with all the things going on, you also see a little bit of what Chris was implying before. We do have a Workforce Housing Act, but we also have local codes because we're so fragmented out here on Long Island, but we do have local codes that build affordable housing. And you look at it, and before we started the pandemic, we had 49 developments that were under the Workforce Housing Act or the local codes, which created 1,300 affordable homes, okay? And that's with the 10% requirement. Some places have more. We've increased by, as I said, 10 new developments, creating another 100 affordable units, but that creates another 1,000 units on Long Island. So the real estate economy for housing is strong. People can't, you know, it's a seller's market at this point. And instead of being the shadow of New York City, I think we are becoming, you know, the new area where people want to be because they want the larger houses because of health reasons. I mean, you're going to see a change in how houses are built. So through this whole pandemic, you know, Long Island, and it goes back to what Kevin said earlier, by the governor keeping everyone informed, you know, we are, I think, much ahead of other places throughout the nation. And if you've just been following what the you know, headlines have been over the last month and a half, we're bouncing back. Things will change. There's no question. We'll have life centers. There was a meeting last night in Oyster Bay as well, a virtual meeting that was talking about the Sears area and trying to propose some new things with not only housing, but medical care and workout places and, you know, entertainment centers. There's going to be a change in what we see, probably less shopping in these facilities, or some redevelopment of some of the old malls are going to be happening because they're going to become life centers where people want to be, especially seniors and the younger population.
Right. All right, good.
Hey, David, I think we need to look at things in terms of a short term, how things are going to look over the next 2 years, and then beyond that. You know, listen, until there's a vaccine that people are comfortable with, there's not going to be confidence. And until people have confidence, you know, there's going to be uncertainty. You know, uncertainty leads to a lack of confidence, and certainty leads to more confidence. And that is going to have a major impact on the overall economy. It's going to have an impact on spending. It's going to have an impact on housing and other investments in our region. Right now, over 98% of the businesses are operating on Long Island in some capacity. Some are limited, some are still restricted in terms of their capacity, but almost every business is. Now, that doesn't comfort you if you're one of the businesses that are not yet able to open, like catering facilities and indoor and outdoor amusements and theaters, etc. So, you know, those people are suffering. Those are the ones I know. So I'm on the, governor put me on the Long Island control room. We meet every day at 3:30 in the afternoon. And initially we were following all the healthcare metrics, you know, to allow us to enter into, you know, it's a distant memory for everybody. Remember, we were in phase 1, then phase 2, and 3 and 4. Now the focus is on getting the rest of the economy open. And I think right now, I think the governor and the New York State Health Commissioner, they're waiting to see what type of rise, if any, or spike are we going to see after schools are open for a while. And, you know, colleges were not off to a great start, especially the colleges upstate. The colleges down here on Long Island are doing better. And our overall infection rate is hovering around 1%, which is actually generally pretty good and has been for a month. I think if we don't see a major spike in the infection rate after K through 12 has been open for a few weeks, I think there's going to be more flexibility to allow that 2% of businesses that haven't been allowed to open in some capacity, and to allow those businesses that have current restrictions on to ease some of those restrictions. That's what my crystal ball feels like based on the information that we discuss every day.
Yeah, and I would, you know, I'd echo a lot of that, and I think, you know, Kevin is right to kind of differentiate this between short-term and long-term. You know, long-term for the reasons we talked about, and I'm pretty optimistic, but the next couple of years are going to be, you know, kind of very dicey, I think. And my biggest worry is just the fiscal situation, you know, for the state, you know, for localities, and for the MTA in particular. And I think, you know, Kevin, I think you said a $16 billion budget with a $12 billion hole, or something to that effect. But you know, that's you know, there's no source of revenue that's going to fill that at this point, you know, unless you get some federal assistance. You know, ridership is still, you know, only 20-25% of what it was, whether you're talking about Long Island Railroad or the subways, and it just can't sustain that level of service. And if it doesn't get some source of revenue, you know, relatively soon, you're going to see a couple of things happen. One, everybody will drive, which means the roads are going to get clogged, and eventually that will choke off the recovery in and of itself. And you'll start to see just the infrastructure start to deteriorate because there just won't be investments in maintenance. So that's my biggest worry, and I think that's the piece where, you know, there just has to be a real. I mean, there are things that the MTA can do, there are things the state can do, but there really needs to be a push to get the assistance in Washington.
Yeah. You know, I have this conversation a lot, and, you know, people are very thankful for the unemployment money and the other assistance, and looking for more. And you can't help but think that the only place the government gets their money from is our taxes. And how much money do they actually have to be giving it back to us, and for how long can they sustain that? But so there has been a shifting and reordering of priorities and actions for companies and people. We've got the dynamic between New York City and Long Island has changed. Peter, you were talking about, people staying at their second home out in the Hamptons, buying homes out here. We've got people working from home versus being in the office. How is that going to look, and how is that going to affect us? Do you think the New York City we're sort of like in an imbalance right now with New York City. Is that going to change? Is that a long-term thing? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the biggest question mark right now is on commercial real estate. Many businesses, I know I work, and people know where our offices is. We're in the Bank of America building in Melville. Every business is allowed to be open in that building. But the parking lot over the summer, I've been back in the office since June 12th. The office parking lot, maybe a third full. After Labor Day, I've seen a little bit of an uptick, but I wouldn't say it's 50% yet. People are getting used to working from home and doing these events. And what is that going to mean in terms of how much space companies need? Are they going to use their current space and be able to socially distance with the extra space? Or are they going to shrink the amount of commercial space they need because they realize a lot of people can work from home, a lot of their employees can, and it's not too bad and it's productive. So that remains to be seen in terms of the commercial office space. I think there is, listen, eventually, Chris said it, eventually New York City is going to come back. New York City's been through so much over the last 100 years. They'll come back. I'm not sure it makes sense for Long Island to try to be interested in poaching companies and trying to benefit from some of the issues that New York City has that Long Island doesn't have. That's going to happen. That the economy have always been inextricably linked and will continue to be so. The New York City, 30% of Nassau residents still commute to the city. They bring back 50% of the disposable income to Nassau County, which supports real estate values in Nassau County. 10% of Suffolk residents still commute to the city. They bring back over 20% of the disposable income. All of that disposable income supports our downtowns and our real estate values. And so I think our economies will continue to be linked. I think there are going to be some short-term opportunities for Long Island to benefit. But in the end of the day, and in the long term, our region will benefit by both economies being strong.
I in conversations with many people, different socioeconomic backgrounds, our group, socioeconomic background right now on the panel, you have kids that are out of the house or they're older. You've got a bigger house, comfortable, you got Wi-Fi, printer, or whatever. The whole population doesn't have that. You've got people that are 35 years old, have 3 kids, from 2 to 6 running around. You've got, the Generation Z now, right? That's the latest one. The 20-year-old that either they've gone to college, they're coming out of college, they're in a small, studio type apartment. So there's a lot of different experiences from working from home. It's not all what we're experiencing, but there's been, I know Peter, and I know Kevin and Chris, you've got studies coming out, and Kevin, you just mentioned you were going to forward one. What's the research that's been done, and what will we see over the next couple of months as far as addressing the economy and COVID and getting back up to speed? Chris, maybe you could start.
Sure. I was, I think, Dave, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's, this whole phenomena of people working from home, is very uneven. I mean, there are some people who can't work from home, and there are some people who just, who don't have the internet access, or the ability to do it. And that's and I think that's one of the, kind of, both constraints on the economy as a whole, and certainly, one of the biggest things, which is causing a divide in terms of the type of educational resources people have, what their options are. I think in terms of the, two things, on working from home, and then the housing shifts between the city and Long Island that I think are big question marks. And I think we all have to approach this with a little humility. Like we don't know how this is going to play out in the long run. Certainly it's not going back to the way it was before. There's so much that, companies have learned that they can do productively, remotely, and workers have discovered that, hey, this actually works pretty well when it can, but there's a lot of built-in constraints to that too. I mean, you mentioned millennials and younger people, there's a lot of concerns among younger people in particular that, one, they feel isolated at home from, they don't have the networking opportunities. They're worried about promotional opportunities. All of those things are kind of, I think, things that kind of put a constraint on the working from home piece. I think kind of what we're probably headed for with many firms is kind of a hybrid situation where people work from home a couple of days a week and go into the office 3 days a week. But that's obviously not going to have to wait for the vaccine to see how that shapes out. But assuming that happens, that does kind of fuel some of the trends that Peter was talking about in terms of people were willing to kind of live on Long Island, and because they're able to do things more remotely. The only thing caveat I would put on that is that one of the big reasons that people are moving out of New York City back to Long Island and other suburbs is it's partly COVID, but it's partly because the city has gotten so damn expensive. Like that, it's just so they're kind of starting to look at, kind of the price difference, and it looks pretty good. That won't continue unless, there's more, inventory and supply that's built. If you're already starting to see, kind of prices going up, so there's only so much stock and only so much people will pay. So unless you kind of expand that supply, that's going to have a ceiling on it as well.
Yeah, and I think another reason we were talking before when I rented part of a house is when we had our youth leaving, there wasn't any fun place to be here to live, as a young person, and now we do have that. So there is that coming back to to the island, which we need, because if they're living here, they meet someone, they decide to have a kid, that's usually the trigger that makes someone buy a house. If they're working here, they're living here, they're not going to go buy a house in Jersey. They're going to buy a house here. And all of us that have houses want someone eventually to be able to buy it. But Peter, go ahead.
I do think there'll probably be a new normal, and depending upon the different generations on how some of the stuff is handled. Obviously the younger generation coming up is probably much more inclined to be able to work from home, but there may be, as they go through their life cycle, having kids, it will depend on what the schools do and how schools are handled in the future. I think there's a short-term approach and a long-term approach. And so just to look at housing, for example, when this pandemic first started, there was inventory of supplies, like appliances. As we go on now, and in the last 6 months, we saw that inventory be depleted because the factories were closed. So that's when the pricing starts to go up and housing becomes more expensive again. I think after the COVID, one of the big things that we're looking at on pricing right now is something that no one ever planned on, which is the wildfires out in California and getting lumber here. Okay, so those prices have gone up from maybe a house that would normally take $26,000 worth of lumber, now going up to $44,000 in lumber. So on one of our homes, for example. So and even to get it, because some of those mills will not reopen. Some of them have been burnt to the ground, down to the ground. Some of them were family owned. They're not reopening. So when you look at that, there's many factors that as we continue through this process, as we solve one issue with COVID, because no one planned on a virus. When we do disaster plans, they never thought of a virus closing up the economy, the workforce and everything else so quickly. But now as we look at it, we will be prepared, I think, a little bit better. And maybe people will work part-time from home, or if they're not feeling well, they can work from home. At least they have that capability. So we'll see some changes in work as we go forward. But as you said earlier, and others have said, it's going to be depending upon what the business is and what you're providing. From us as a not-for-profit, we have to be in touch with our clients to understand what their needs are and to help them through the process. Some can be done virtually, but some needs to be in the office as well. So.
Kevin, I know you have another appointment. What time do we have you till?
I got 10 more minutes. I have to be out at Brookhaven National Lab, but I appreciate the sensitivity, Dave. If I could just add on to Peter's point, we've had an imbalance in supply and demand for decades. We had it pre-COVID, we have it during COVID, and we're going to have it post-COVID until we increase that and improve that balance that Chris alluded to. Considering what New Jersey and Connecticut have, we don't have enough multifamily housing, and that is where the imbalance is. So we have a big demand, a limited supply that leads to higher costs, and we need municipalities to still be receptive to improving and increasing the amount of multifamily housing in our region. So Islip took a big step last night that Peter alluded to. Hopefully Oyster Bay will do the same when it comes to Hicksville, but we need more. And so that's not COVID related, but we can maybe use the COVID crisis to get more multifamily housing projects approved because it will help jumpstart the economy. We'll put a lot of people back to work and go towards addressing that imbalance in supply and demand.
Okay. Normally I would hold questions to the end, but since we're losing you, Kevin, so there's a question for you panelists, and after reading it, I might be the one that's most qualified to answer it, but the question is, how's commercial tenants doing? Do you anticipate renegotiation of major leases? Do you anticipate landlords and tenants being at odds, or are they finding a way to work it out?
I think you should answer that, David.
So it's funny, Kevin, you said that 98% of the companies on the island are working in some capacity. So my survey of landlords, that they're collecting 95% of the rents every month from tenants. So that, yeah, that is a positive thing. I'm not seeing any major renegotiations of leases. I am seeing that there are major public companies are sort of holding off any requirement till January to move forward with, just to see, what that new normal is. They don't really know. Right now, between 5 and 7% of the U.S. workforce works remotely. So even if it doubles to 10 to 14%, it's not going to make a huge change, especially if we're going back to the metric was 235 square feet per office employee. That includes common area and conference rooms and everything. And it went down to like 185 square feet. I think that's going to wind up reversing and going back to that 235 just to have some more social distancing. So we think that balancing is going to really happen. But here's advice to tenants that are out there that are listening. Reach out to your landlord and have a discussion before you stop paying rent or before you're running into a problem, because you could restructure your lease that maybe you get the next 4 months, you don't have to pay rent, and it gets built into a new longer term lease, or it gets built into some later payments that you would make. So Kevin, you were talking on the Regional Economic Development Council. There was a report coming out as well, right? Yeah.
Well, we have to submit a plan to Albany next Friday, so it'll become public after the week after.
All right, so you can't give us a little.
Yeah, no, I will. We're trying to identify, again, as Chris alluded to, short and long-term projects or policies that would help either jumpstart the economy or go towards the long-term investment in our economy. So we've identified about 15 projects in Nassau and Suffolk County that don't need any state funding, but could use an oomph from the state to bring it over the municipal regulatory finish line. And again, once those projects get the approval, they have the financing, they could put people to work, and then they could put people in homes or apartments. So we've identified a bunch of projects with input from the real estate community. So that's one thing. We need to look at childcare and daycare as a business issue and as an economic development issue. You know, women make up, half of the workforce. Childcare is not a woman's issue. It's not just a family issue. It's a business issue. And so being supportive of more daycare will allow more people to get back to work, especially with schools being in this half remote world and half in-person mode. So that's important. We think offshore wind projects will create a lot of jobs for our region. They also face some local regulatory hurdles, and we need the state to step in and get these projects over the finish line. And so there are a bunch of things that we could be doing where we don't need a handout. We don't need any money from the feds or the state. We could control part of our own destiny. But there's one thing, Dave, and I think, part of my job, I need to be the cheerleader for the region. I try to put a positive spin on things. I could be as negative as the next guy as well. And one thing that we need to be careful about is that people are very mobile today. And the COVID proved it, that people can work from home and they don't have to be in New York City to get business done, and they don't even have to be on Long Island. There's an effort to just continue to increase taxes. We're one of the highest tax regions and states in the country as it is. We got to be very careful of businesses wanting to pack up, individuals wanting to pack up, and go to cheaper, lower cost regions with maybe no state income taxes. So we got to be very careful that we don't tax people any further away from our region, because that's something that will be devastating to our recovery efforts.
Right.
Kevin, I couldn't echo that more. One of the reports was that people are fleeing New York to go to Florida and Texas specifically because of lower taxes and being more affordable. So when we look at affordability, that's one of the major factors that we have to deal with every time.
Okay. So let's just talk quickly. We talked about a lot of structural assets, double track, triple track, getting people reverse commute from Queens. But we've heard of the last mile, right? From Amazon, delivering packages that last mile. We have a last mile people problem. We could go from Queens to Farmingdale train station, but how do you get to Melville, which is 9 million square feet of commercial space? Is there, Peter and Chris and Kevin, are there plans, like the bus rapid transit? Is that ever going to happen? Are there other mechanisms that we're looking at to complete that last leg to make this real?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a shot at that. I mean, I don't know what the current status is of the BRT, on Route 110, but that's certainly, I think, the place on Long Island where you're most likely to see it happen, because you have the density of businesses and the traffic that you need to really support it. There are probably other places that might as well. But I do think looking at technology and different forms of what they call micro mobility now is something that has a lot of potential for Long Island. I mean, it's like a lot of other things, kind of the places that have more density are more likely to be able to do it. But if you're looking at what's happening now, and particularly with COVID, just the amount of people who are taking scooters and mopeds, things like Revel that's there, biking, the mode of transportation that has increased far more than anything else during this pandemic is biking. So, and I think that, and with the possibilities now of, kind of shared parking and other things that you can do with technology, I think that, all of those different tools are what you need to look at to kind of solve the last mile problem. And it's going to be a different solution in different places. And a lot of it is going to have to do, it's a connection between land use and transportation. You can't have mass transit unless you have, people and businesses in proximity. But there are different types of transit you can use for different levels of density.
Yeah, Chris is so right. We're fortunate. I talked about leadership before. We're fortunate. We have I believe, my opinion, two great county executives, Steve Ballone and Laura Curran. They get it. They're interested in doing things new. They understand the value of bus rapid transit. And one of the issues that they'll have, though, in implementing some of that is that the finances of both counties are going to be significantly impacted as well. They rely on sales taxes primarily. They both collect over $1 billion a year in sales taxes. Spending has been curtailed with the shutdown, and just the people holding on and not spending as much as they have been historically. And so that's probably going to impact the implementation of BRT. But I think the plans are there, especially for the Route 110 corridor. It makes sense because not everything goes east-west like the railroad. We need some better north-south connectivity. And I think a lot of our supervisors get it, our county executives get it. But I think it's probably going to be a while before things get implemented, given the financial condition of the counties and the state. And with that, David, I'm sorry, I got to run out to Brookhaven National Lab. I thank you for being able to participate in this panel, and I'll leave the rest of the 15 minutes or so of questions in the good, able hands of Chris and Peter.
Take care.
Thank you, Kev. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Be safe.
Good weekend. Okay. So we are, the last mile part of this is, when we had the 9/11, catastrophe that's now, almost 20 years ago, there was thinking that there's going to be an exodus of the city coming out to here to Long Island, businesses. Same thing with COVID. They're saying, okay, exodus, come out to Long Island. And conversations with major corporations were like, look, 80% of our employees don't own cars. 20% that do own cars, most of them won't go any further than their house to the train station. So Long Island, you could take a train out to a train station, but then you're dead-ended. So we do need to, as much as we've done here to sort of reverse that migration west into the city and keeping our youth here, which keeps employers here, we still need this last component. Not the final last component, but a big last component. Chris, you were talking about, well, we have a couple of questions. Why don't we go to that? Mm-hmm. So one of the questions is, do you think, Eric Williams is asking, do you think Long Island housing prices will go down due to COVID, like would it eventually be a buyer's market, right? So recently we've seen home sales go up 24.7%. The values have gone way up. So I guess the question here is that sustainable going forward?
I'm just going to say, in 30 years of real estate, everything's cyclical. So things will go up, things will go down, and things will have major factors. I don't think anyone ever planned on, for example, the latest with the wildfires in California. You know what I mean? So you're on an island, you have limited capacity to build and populate and build houses. So there's so many factors that go into it, but it will vary over the years as we go forward as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add to it. I mean, as Peter said, this is cyclical. I mean, in the last 10 years, we've been in a cycle where, all the demand was kind of closer into the city, and that's where the price increases were. Now you're seeing a swing back. I mean, actually, some of the, some of the moving out of the city, started happening before COVID hit, just based on price and other factors. So, it depends on so many things. As where is the housing going to be built? How are preferences and tastes going to change? I mean, I don't think the kind of the level of or the pace of price increases that we've seen in the last 4 months are sustainable. But I do think it's unlikely to come down a lot unless one or two things happen. Either the economy really tanks, which we don't want to see happen, or there's more supply that's created.
And we also have the convergence of two things: the COVID issue of people coming out here, and then a pent-up demand that no one was able to look at houses for 5 months or so.
Right.
That normally would have bought a house in the spring, right? That's where a lot of houses sell.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that pent-up demand be satisfied now. There was one question I was going to ask Kevin, but I think it's important enough to bring up, is when he was talking about the wind power as part of their recommendation. So for everyone that's on this Zoom call, being free from fossil fuel is not a one technology solution. It's not just, solar farms, or panels on your house. It's wind. It's using, battery storage for, evening. I worked with Dave Cologne a few years ago with the Suffolk County Planning Commission to come up with a universal wind power code for all of the Suffolk County townships, should they adopt it. Because we had companies, major employers here that were employing thousands of employees, said, look, we want to get off the grid as best we can. We want to put up, wind power. And you had residents coming out against it. All of a sudden, the propellers of the wind turbines were eating birds like kids eat Skittles. I mean, there was reports all over the place. It was contributing to global warming because it's close to the earth. It was a monstrosity to deal with. So hopefully, if we want to make a change, that means change, and things aren't going to be exactly the same, as they were before. You guys have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think you're absolutely right and where you're headed. I do think that offshore wind is probably the source with the biggest potential. You're absolutely right that, no one source is going to do it, and you want to, create a level playing field so that different technologies can provide it. But there is so much potential for energy supply from wind, and up and down the East Coast. The other thing about it that, we don't talk about quite as much, it's also a big job generator. The number of jobs that you can create through, assembly, manufacturing, maintenance of these facilities, is a big deal, and it could be a growth industry for Long Island and the region as a whole. But absolutely, the need to both provide for growing energy needs and to bring down carbon emissions is one of the toughest issues we face.
Yeah.
And like everything else, even with the residential portion of it, living in this area, you want to make sure that it's affordable. We're a high cost area, period. So how do we bring down those costs? And with everything else, it's not one simple solution. We need to look at these solutions. We need to become less dependent on fossil fuels and other fuels that we've been using in the past, and look for new ways to bring down that cost.
You're absolutely right, Peter, with our cost here, including energy. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and people who know me well, I have a friend who grew up in Texas, so some people will know who I'm talking about. And we were talking about Tesla with the electric car, and we did a calculation that in Texas, the car got the equivalent of 100 miles per gallon, from a cost basis. because their kilowatt charge was around 10 cents, a kilowatt hour. Here in New York, it's like they get 50 miles a gallon because our energy costs are about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's double of Texas. I don't know what it is compared to the rest of the country, but certainly that's a very demonstrative equation, 100 miles a gallon versus 50 miles a gallon. Peter, so I have another question from Jeff Hawk. Peter, you're talking about Seritage and Oyster Bay meeting. So Jeff made the observation, he was there, that there was predominantly older people at the meeting and really very few younger people. And he was asking, how do we sort of change that and get the younger people more involved? I know from my own experience, if you've got older people that are complaining about something and you've got a couple of young people, the older people bash on the younger people. I mean, that's my experience of these things, but
this is where, David, it's a good example of there are groups out there, the millennial groups, the new generations coming up are establishing their own groups. They're much more electronic and sophisticated in electronics. And I think that holding the public hearings virtually, getting those groups involved, as you know, look at REI and Sean and what he has done to get the word out to the different groups that are out there electronically and get the word out so they can participate. I will tell you, in all the hearings that I've done over the years, one of the biggest issue about getting younger people out was they're working 2 jobs to support their family, or at least a job and a half. That usually one person goes to work, works an off shift, goes to work while the other parent watches the kids. All right. So it's very hard for them to get out to any public hearing and speak. There may be a way to start using the media, the social media that we have, to get more people involved and to participate in these public hearings.
Okay. We have another question, John Mazzio. He's talking about how do we make it easier for developers to assemble smaller parcels in a TOD community? And I don't know if you guys want to opine on that.
Yeah, I'll just comment. Everything's local, so it depends on I mean, it's a process, and it's a timely process, and sometimes that the time it takes it costs a lot of money, and then you have the affordability issue. So it really depends on where you're looking at those parcels to acquire and move forward. As some of the larger developments around TOD areas, such as Ronkonkoma and other areas that were looked at, people are looking at different ways to handle that. But at the end of the day, sometimes the municipality, if they need to grab some parcels that are going to benefit a wider range, we always have eminent domain at a municipal level. So private sales is the best way to go about it most of the times, but it could be timely and costly. And it's always been an issue.
So I'm going to have a final question for you, Peter, and then for Chris. So Peter, studies that I've seen on market rate apartments, that Long Island is about 100,000 units out of balance with supply and demand. Where are we with affordable units? Because I don't think we ever really hear that number.
Well, affordable units are always underestimated. What's helping is some of these codes that are put in that if a developer is building housing, that a certain set aside has to be for affordable. But affordable has a real wide term, Dave. We in the housing industry look at what income population are you trying to serve. But when you look at a majority of the people in rentals, for example, especially what we would consider affordable rentals, are paying more than 50% of their income towards the housing expense. That's way above the normal of 30%. So I would even say those individuals would need additional, more affordable housing out there. So we're lagging tremendously behind in a number of affordable units. And as you all know, if you don't have a really diverse housing stock for various incomes, it will really jeopardize the economic conditions of Long Island down the road. You need your teachers, you need your medical professionals, you need the people that work in the restaurants, you need the people that work in the stores, you need the professionals as well. But if you don't have that diversity, we know what will happen to the economic condition.
Okay. Chris, so Chris and I, just so everybody knows, we've been in some discussions and giving RPA, you know, RPA is planning, and it's regional planning, and they have the ability to look at other areas and look at Long Island. And, you know, I've always been trying to give you guys a bigger footprint out here on the island. Is Long Island, is there enough for you guys to do here? Is it a fertile enough market? I know you have offices in Jersey, Connecticut, Manhattan. What do we have to do to get you to come out here?
Oh, that's a great question, Dave, and I appreciate it. And there is plenty for us to do, without a doubt. You know, and you know, we're probably doing a lot more now than people realize. A lot of the stuff that we do is under the radar. I mean, you know, we've been, you know, helping the Long Island Index for years with, you know, their research and reports they put out. You know, similar things for Long Island Community Foundation. Lately, we've been through, you know, a contract with the Suffolk County IDA. We've been helping a number of municipalities come up with downtown or corridor plans. We've done these for Amityville and Ronkonkoma and Route 110, and most recently for the Hauppauge Industrial Park. So we kind of do a lot of that work. You know, but I agree, we can be more visible out here, and we would love to do that. So, you know, obviously we're all constrained at the moment in terms of our physical mobility with this, but, you know, we welcome any opportunity to come out and, you know, speak with any of the groups, or even if there are issues that come up. I should say that we are, you know, one of the things that you know, kind of our advantage is that we're multidisciplinary. You know, we deal with housing, we deal with transportation, we deal with economic development, environmental issues. So, and I think that's where we kind of do our best work, where those different issues come together.
Okay, good. So we have one last question. Sean Deary, who's an intern at the Real Estate Institute. He's a graduate student in progress over at SUNY Stony Brook. And the question is Port Jeff, making Port Jeff a hub for offshore wind, or what waterline area is best suited? I think the current one is off of Mastic or so on the South Shore, where there actually might be more wind right off the ocean than on the Sound. But Port Jeff has seen, you know, a resurgence of apartments. Tritech also did a, I forgot the name of it, Boatyard maybe, or?
Shipyard.
Shipyard. You guys have anything on that? So I think, Sean, the South Shore has bigger winds, and Long Island, a part of the study that I did with Dave Colon on the Universal Wind Code is Long Island has sufficient enough wind speeds to facilitate what we're trying to do here. And the wind is a lot different from ground level to 20 foot to 80 foot above. You know, it increases a lot at, you know, the higher you go. So the offshore keeps the visual aspects of the wind farms low. But anyway, well, listen, this has been very informative. Thank you guys for joining us, Peter Elkowitz and Chris Jones.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
does this go back to Pat Fogarty, or am I saying goodbye to everybody?
No, you can say goodbye, Dave.
Well, thank you everybody for looking at your 15-inch screen for an hour and a half. And next week we have another panel that we're joining with a slightly different focus. And you need to attend both this session and next week's session for the continuing education credits. But again, Chris, Peter, and Kevin, thank you. And thank you, REI, for the platform. And everybody have a great weekend.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Bye-bye.